to pan pastels and how you can use them to create beautifully soft, out of focus backgrounds. So the reference photo that I'm going to be using today is this one. So as you can see, you can't really see any details there, it's just fragments of light and shadow. And this is an example of one I'm working on at the moment. So I've used pan pastel in the green along these little corners and just behind the flower here. So as you can see, it's very, very smooth and very, very vivid. So when you're using coloured pencil, it can be incredibly time consuming trying to slowly build up each layer to achieve a really even and smooth background. And recently I've been incorporating backgrounds into my own work, so this wasn't something I usually did. And I was originally using Faber-Castell pastel pits to achieve basically smooth blended backgrounds that make the background appear out of focus and give the illusion of distance in my drawings. This worked great for a time, but I could never achieve the smoothness I was hoping for, and it also was really time consuming trying to fill the entire background. So then I came across PANPASTEL and decided to order some colours to give it a try. It's a product a lot of artists have been raving about, so I wanted to see what all the fuss was about really. So being my favourite colour and the colour I'm most likely to use for my background, I ordered the 10 set PANPASTEL in the green. So this is how it comes. So with this set, you get 5 shades of green, just here, along with 5 tints, including the titanium white there. So these help you to blend and adjust the shades depending on the shades you're trying to match or achieve. And within these sets you also get soft applicators, so you get them just in the middle here and ones at the bottom. I'll just take that off so you can see. So they're just like little sponges. So that's soft, spelled S-O-F-F-T. So you've got different sized applicators that you can use just here. So we're going to be applying the PANPASTEL to Langton Prestige paper. So I've already mapped out my drawing, so I'm going to be applying the PANPASTEL around the line work which I transferred earlier. And for the borders, I'm just using standard washi tape, so I can get good dramatic crisp edges. So washi tape has a very low tack, so it's less likely to damage the paper when you remove it. And I know some people use brands like Frog Tape and other low tack tapes as well, so they're all fine to use. So I've taped off my edges and I'm going to go in and apply a nice vivid green. This way when I start applying darker shades, that vivid green is going to come through beneath and make it appear richer. So the vivid green is also going to act as the brightest highlights in my background. Now when you are using PANPASTEL, you have a range of applicators depending on the surface area you intend to fill. In this case my drawing is quite small, so I'm only going to be using a small one which will prevent me from going over my line work too much. So here I've laid out all of my colours in the set, that way they're much more easily accessible when I'm using them. I'm going to start off by applying a bright yellow green using the small soft applicator. So you only need a very, very small amount because the pigment is so vivid and goes such a long way. So using dabbing motions, I'm going to push the pastel into the paper. So the wonderful thing about PANPASTEL is its versatility across so many paper surfaces. You can use these pastels on high tooth papers as well as smooth papers like the Landon Prestige paper that I'm using here. It's also designed not to be used with a fixative, so that's not to say that you can't use them, but fixatives can sometimes be a little problematic for pastel artists as they have a habit of desaturating or changing the colour in their work, and you can sometimes get a little bit of a texture change if the fixative isn't applied evenly. I do like to use the smaller applicators, especially in this dabbing technique for these types of backgrounds, because it gives a very speckled appearance, much in the same way you'd see speckles of light coming through leaves. It does take a little bit longer this way, and I do find that the pigment is more condensed in one area and doesn't tend to spread as well as when you are using them with some of the other applicators. I would like to show you some of the other soft applicators and the effects that you can get when you're using them as well. So these are the ones that you get within the sets. So here I've got the rounded sponge and a triangular sponge. So the triangular one is great for corners and getting into tighter areas like the flower petals here. So the round sponge is great to use on large areas when you want to spread the pastel around as much as possible. Some of them are designed to be used on the soft knives, which I don't have at the moment, and there are a number of others that you can purchase to achieve different results as well. So here with me using the rounded sponge, you can see how much further the pastel is going over the paper. It is a little bit lighter because you are spreading the same amount of pastel over a greater distance, but this can result in much more transparent layers. I do find as a disadvantage of using the larger sponges is that there is much more pastel dust that sits on top of the paper rather than being pushed into the paper tooth. I do find when I'm using the smaller applicator, the dust is reduced and the pastel pigment adheres much better to the paper. Because you're basically pushing the applicator, the smaller one, into those small little tooth grains. I also prefer the subtle decal effect of the smaller one to that of the big round kind of blob impressions that the round sponge gives. And for the benefit of the drawing because it's such a small scale, I'm going to stick to showing you how to create a background using a smaller sponge to begin with. I'm going to try and soften some of those blobbish shapes and blend them out a little bit. And I'm going to try out some tints as well to show you what happens to the colours when you use them. Here I'm using a bright yellow-green tint. Sorry you can't see the pan as it's a little bit out of shot. I'm going to go in and use a chromium oxide green tint, which is the wrong colour really to lighten this shade, as you'd want to use it for the chromium oxide green to maintain the colour whilst lightening it. You see, I don't want to change the colour, just make it brighter, so make sure to use a tint within the same colour set to achieve this. Now I could just go in with a titanium white, but the problem with that would be that it would hugely desaturate that beautiful bright yellow-green that I've just spent time applying. I'd end up with a bit of a pastel look to my colour, and that's something I want to avoid. It has gone a bit dusty since I added the chromium oxide green, so the round sponge does pick up quite a bit of pastel, which is kind of just sitting on the surface. I'll have to spread the pastel out and try to push it into the tooth a bit more with the smaller applicator. Because I am using a hot pressed paper, the grain is quite smooth, so I do need to be careful not to smother the paper with excess pastel and risk wasting it. Sadly, it's very expensive and I want to preserve it for as long as possible to make it cost effective. So PANPASTEL is an incredibly soft pastel that is compressed with minimum binders and fillers. So don't drop them. It does mean that it can have trouble during the delivery process, so dropping it or knocking it can cause the pastel to fracture in the pan, which makes it much more difficult to work with and means your sponge ends up picking up a lot of excess pastel powder. I have known some artists to bind it with alcohol, but I'd recommend that if this does happen to you, don't do this. Adding chemicals will change the properties of the pastel and alter the results you're able to achieve. So see if you can get a replacement sent out or order from a trustworthy supplier so you know it will be easy to exchange, and that they will package it really well. I ordered mine from Jackson's Art Supplies and they arrived perfect because it was packaged really, really well. So just be aware of the risks when ordering this product online. So I'm now adding a bright yellow-green shade in the corner so that it's much darker than the paper. And then when I come to remove the washi tape, that corner is really going to pop. So I've decided to diverse a little from the reference photo as well and just go a little free with the background and see where the colours take me. And because I am trying to achieve an out of focus background, I haven't got any constraints of detail. I just want my drawing to really pop. So I'll actually be using a lot of reds and oranges in the flower. So I'm working with very contrasting colours. So I want to avoid making the background too overwhelming and busy and just have a beautiful soft wash of green. And that's the beauty of backgrounds. You don't have to overcomplicate them to achieve a striking and beautiful piece of art. Sometimes a background that is too detailed can mean that your subject just becomes lost amongst it. If backgrounds are a little scary, and I have to admit sometimes I find them a little overwhelming, consider opting for just a strong contrasting colour that will make your subject stand out, or a complementary colour where your subject looks very naturally placed within its surroundings, like it's always been there. And simple colour backgrounds can give a very contemporary appearance to your artwork as well. So there are times when that is something that you might want to kind of achieve within your work or aim for, and then there are other times where having more detail in the background is something that you might want to do. So it really depends on the subject that you're drawing and the context, and this is something that you really need to plan before you start drawing. But for now, just focus on just a simple background just to make it a little bit easier, which is kind of how I've introduced myself to developing backgrounds within my work. So I'm just building up the colours now and softly blending them together. You can see how smoothly they are applying and how wonderful the pastel is adhering to the paper. You don't have to use a toothy paper or pastel paper with these. I'm simply using a hot-pressed paper that you can buy at any art shop. You can also use canvas, matte photo paper and cardstock, so don't feel like you have to go out and get a super expensive paper to use this medium. And this is why PANPASTEL is such a great medium to work with, because it is so forgiving and so versatile, meaning that you can use it on so many different surfaces and not feel restricted to just using pastel papers. And it also means you can apply it to really smooth papers, because when you're combining coloured pencil and pastel, you don't want to have to basically substitute for a pastel based paper which is very toothy. So when you come to using your coloured pencil on it, you're going to get a lot of grain. So it is really forgiving in that respect. So you're able to achieve really smooth results with both the pastel and the pencil, and you don't have to then change the paper stock that you're using. So if there's a brand of paper that you're really accustomed to using with your coloured pencil and it really works for you, you don't then have to get used to another type of paper, which can be really hard, because when you're working with different papers, the properties of the papers, the surfaces, they're very different, and you have to use very different techniques. So now I'm just going to kind of stop talking for a little bit and just speed up the footage so that you can see how the background comes together. great thing about pan pastel as well is if you go over the lines like I've done here, you can just use a rubber and just rub out those areas that you've messed up. So pan pastel is actually really easy to remove from the paper, so it both adheres to the paper really well and also can be lifted from the paper quite easily as well. So if you are like prone to going over the lines like me, you can easily just get like a soft rubber like I'm using right now and just rub out those little areas. Pan pastel is much less messier than pastel pit, so there is a lot less dust to contend with. I'm actually quite a messy artist, so I do tend to smudge my work sometimes, but I do combat this by using a rubber fairly frequently. It prevents it getting out of hand and building up, making it harder to remove at a later stage. So I do recommend consistently just double checking and just rubbing out areas just in case that when you do come to notice it at a later stage, it's a little bit easier to rub out before then. Although it's less likely to smear than your common pastel pencils, I do still advise that you avoid putting your skin directly on the pastel itself. You still run the risk of transferring the pastel across your work, as well as the oils in your skin being transferred onto the paper. To prevent this, you can use a bit of paper underneath your hand or a bit of glassine paper. So that's the same sort of paper that comes with most pastel papers, where they put a sheet of glassine paper in between each paper so that the drawing doesn't transfer to the underside of the other sheet. So this is one of my favourite parts. Don't get me wrong, I do still love the drawing aspect of it, but I love to see the final results, especially when you're making borders so crisp like this, so when you're using tape to make really, really crisp borders, and then you get the chance at the end to finally peel off the tape and you're just left with that really beautiful line. So it is probably one of my favourite stages. All that time that you spent putting into it has really like come together at this final stage. It is probably important to mention as well that when you are peeling the tape off your paper is to peel it at an angle away from your drawing. So if by chance the tape does happen to tear the paper, you're not going to have a massive tear going straight through your drawing. It will tear towards the edges of the paper away from it. I think it's also a little bit of impatience and eagerness to remove the tape and see the border, but I also do like to remove the tape once the background is complete, so that any temperature changes in the room can cause the tack on the underside of the tape to melt slightly, so I don't want the tape to stick any further to the paper, so I want to kind of get that tape off as quickly as possible. And that does mean I need to be a little bit more careful when I am coming to the drawing part of it, so when I'm starting to add my coloured pencil, I do have to make sure that I've got glassine paper or a sheet of paper covering that pastel so that I don't smear it into those crisp white edges. So my background hasn't got very deep shadows in it. I don't have any of the really, really dark greens or any blacks to make them really, really heavy in the shadows. But I kind of like the subtle effect because I'm going to have quite a lot of shadow in my flower and my bee. I actually want to keep my background quite light, so it's kind of worked to my advantage not having the rest of the pastel pans and keeping the background quite pale. So I really hope that you've enjoyed watching this little tutorial slash introduction to Pan Pastel, and I hope you found it a little bit helpful if you have been considering incorporating backgrounds into your work as well, because I found this very simple method a little less overwhelming. If I'd kind of like jumped in and gone full-blown detail, I probably wouldn't be incorporating backgrounds into my work anymore. But this method has allowed me to grow a love of developing this, and I love the contrasting colours, like having like these rich reds and oranges against a beautiful soft green background. So I do really love this method, and I have really loved using PANPASTEL. I do only have the green set on me at the moment. I mean, that one set me back about just over £60. So it is really expensive, and I would recommend, if you are going to try these, just buying a couple of pans to begin with, and I think they're about £7 each. And then just giving it a play around, just see how you get on with them, and then if it is something that you think, I do really like these, I want to invest in more, you can then go and buy some more of the sets, which is probably a little bit cheaper than buying them all individually. And I do like the sets because it kind of keeps all of the corresponding colours together. So if I need my greens, I grab my greens. If I need my reds, then I can grab my reds, rather than kind of rummaging through loads of different individual pans. I know some artists do dislike the fact that you don't have individual lids for each of the pan colours, but you can buy these separately online as well. And I think, I mean, if you're going to be using a lot of those colours anyway, I mean, it's nice to have them laid out, and then you can just kind of put them all together again. So that aspect really doesn't bother me as such, but I know it does bother a few other people. But the great thing is you can still buy the lids, so it's not too much of an issue with the sets. And if you'd like to see any more of my work, you can come find me on my website, which is www.artistrachelcard.com. And I upload all of the videos I upload on my YouTube here. I also have a comprehensive materials list, which I've got on my website as well. So it's like all the papers, all the pencils, and all of the different of my favourite materials that I like to use, including sharpeners and rubbers if that's something that you've been struggling finding really good sharpeners to sharpen your pencils. I know I had a trouble for a really long time trying to find the perfect sharpener that didn't break all my pencils, because the pencils are really expensive and I don't want to have to keep breaking the leads every 5 seconds. So it took me a while, but I did find one in the end, so you can find that on my website as well, the full list there. And do come follow me on my social media pages, because I upload a lot of my progress images, I upload a lot of videos, time lapses as well there. And as always, do pop any suggestions for content that you would like me to discuss. So if there's any products that you're interested in, or there's something that you want to learn how to do, particular methods with coloured pencil or pastels, just pop them down into the comments as well, or you can suggest them through my social media. I always welcome messages from people, so just message me anytime if you need any help or suggestions. I'm always happy to answer them. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you all again soon.